So, welcome to 2021, everyone. I'm Martin Lane, and joining me today to discuss the week in cannabis is my colleague and cannabis editor-at-large, Rhys Cohen. Rhys,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year.
So, here we are, second week of January. Lots to chat about already. I was going to start actually with a story. I know it's been all over the press this week, but the news that Amsterdam's mayor is calling for foreign tourists to be banned from the city's coffee shops to help crack down on its soft drugs trade, which kind of caught my eye a little bit because obviously tourism is, you know, it's often cited as having a positive outcome in places where recreational cannabis is legal. Colorado, obvious example. And I remember during the kind of New Zealand referendum, there was talk about a tourism boom potentially if New Zealand had voted yes. Probably talk mostly coming from me, to be fair. But anyway, so I guess, yeah, is the mayor right? Is cannabis tourism more trouble than it's worth? Do we think?
I don't know. I mean, have you been to Amsterdam?
I've never actually been to Amsterdam. No.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I was there
know.
a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah, several years ago. I passed through, and I had a great time. Lovely city, beautiful city. Lots of cannabis flying around, which is cool and fun. But you know, it's funny. Like the Dutch don't really smoke much cannabis, but they've got really low cannabis use rates compared to their immediate neighbours, like the Brits and the Germans. You know, and it's been a bit of a point of contention for some time. The Amsterdam, you know, cannabis coffee shop kind of situation. I remember, maybe like several years ago now, this exact issue came up and they were talking about, oh, should we make it so only residents are allowed to buy? You know, because basically I think people are kind of probably quite sick of, you know, Australian, American, British tourists blowing in it from out of town, smoking too much weed, passing out on the footpath, you know, falling into the canals, or whatever. So I can kind of get where they're coming from. And then also, you know, there's been a lot of that political tension recently because the Dutch are also trying to get up and running a pilot program where they'll do their own cultivation that'll feed into the coffee shops. Because at the moment, it's all black market stuff, right?
Right.
And there's been a lot of pushback from communities where those cultivation facilities have been proposed. So maybe it's a bit of a compromise, like, hey, you know, we'll proceed with our plan to do a pilot legal recreational cultivation operation, but we'll try and calm people down by, you know, signaling that we're not going to just open the floodgates and let everybody else in.
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because although I haven't been to Amsterdam, my daughter has. She went when she was 19, and you know, her reasons for going to Amsterdam, she told me officially, were to go and see Anne Frank's house.
Big Van Gogh fan, I assume, as well?
She did, yeah, absolutely. She did see Anne Frank's house, but I'm not sure that's how she spent the majority of her time in Amsterdam. Right. So, yeah, it's a bit like, here's similar things about Prague, don't you? It's like, you know, it used to be this really interesting, you know, European capital that people didn't used to be able to visit, you know, a few years ago. And now it's basically somewhere where Brits go for, you know, hen weekends and stag do's. So I kind of get, as you say, that notion that, you know, it becomes something that it wasn't initially intended to be. But that said, you think, well, that is where a vast majority of the tourism dollars come from. So, you know, kind of get that you might get fed up with all these people coming in and getting high and passing out on the pavement, as you say. Yeah. But sort of,
I mean, especially if they're like tourists, like people who probably don't use cannabis much to begin with, who are already drunk, and then they stumble into a coffee shop. You know, that's a recipe for disaster for sure. But also, like, maybe the Netherlands, like maybe the Dutch don't need the tourism that badly. They're not like Prague, you know, like, they're not, I don't see them as being, you know, desperate for pot tourists to prop up their failing economy, you know, like they do all right by themselves. You know, so,
I did notice that it wasn't the same thing happened with the red light tours as well. I think the official tours of the red light district no longer happen, but you can still kind of wander in if you so desire. So definitely feels like they're trying to clean things up a little bit.
Sure, which makes sense. I think, you know, one thing to keep in mind is you know, of course, people listening to this, watching this, us, you know, like we're interested in cannabis, we're into it. Of course, cannabis tourism makes sense. Of course, that would be desirable. But most people probably aren't that keen on cannabis tourism. Most people, you know, might have some reservations about it, you know, and it, you know, it's a lesson for cannabis tourists all over the world, you know, behave yourself. You know, don't give everyone a bad name.
So you know how I love the opportunity to talk to you and test a few completely, you know, unproven theories. So one of my crazy notions is, given what we know about cannabis and we know about the different, you know, ways that it can be cultivated, and that has a different, you know, outcome in terms of the product itself, you know, will we see, and I know a lot's got to happen between now and this, you know, point in the future that may or may not come, but, you know, in 10 years time, will going to a cannabis farm be the same as going to a winery in the Hunter or Mudgee or, you know, the Barossa? I mean, can you see that happening in Australia?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, when and if it does happen, because, you know, you look at, I mean, alcohol is a good comparison, right? So you have me and my 14, you know, the other 14 guys on my football team all want to go to Prague for the weekend because we can get, you know, pints for £2 each, and we can, you know, drink until we're sick on the street, and no one will be upset with us. And then you also have, oh, honey, shouldn't we tour the southern, you know, Riviera this year? I hear the grapes are particularly good. You know, it's the same with cannabis, right? You're going to have people who want to fly to Amsterdam to blow their mind out, you know, hot knifing sort of rosin on the street. And you're going to have people who want to go to a wellness retreat. You know, like this is very popular in California, right? Are these sort of like, you know, very much so. Come to the vineyard, come to the cannabis plantation. You know, we have like, you know, we've got these, you know, accommodation that looks like tents and it's all rustic, and we get back to you know, like it takes all sorts.
So it's a sort of related issue, really, and just sort of thinking about the US. You mentioned Colorado there, but, you know, there's been more talk in the last week or so about, obviously, the Senate has been flipped in favor of the Democrats, and Andrew Cuomo this week, as New York governor, has been talking about legalizing cannabis in New York again. And I know that's, you know, been mooted before, but it looks like things are definitely moving in a positive direction. I guess a couple of questions, really. And the first one is, do you think that makes any difference to Australia whatsoever? You know, are we kind of part of this global movement where it's you know, those indicators are positive for Australia, or are we really just kind of running our own race and it makes no difference?
You know that old saying, you know, the US sneezes and the world catches a cold. That's still very much the case, you know, for all things, including cannabis. And the more you know, progressive reforms that happen in America, the more likely, you know, we are to follow suit, for sure. I think New York in particular is very culturally significant. You know, it is, you know, other than, you know, California, it's one of the cultural hotspots for New York. You know, it's where all the finance capital is. It's you know, it's a world city. I think that would send quite a strong signal. I think that would, yeah, for sure have some kind of an impact. And then, of course, you know, after a while, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience much as well, but, you know, working in cannabis for a while, you know, you chat with Americans, you chat with Canadians or whatever. It becomes a bit embarrassing after a while to have to describe the cannabis culture of Australia. And I think, you know, once we get, you know, COVID behind us in a few years' time, you know, Americans are going to be coming to Australia and going, what do you mean I can't, you know, X, Y, or Z? Or, yeah, I don't know. It all contributes, right? Yeah.
It's a very interesting point you make, actually, because I think the perception of Australia from outside at times is very different to the reality. So, and yeah, you're right. I've kind of, you know, spoken to a few people in the US who are amazed at, you know, where we are at in terms of the kind of move towards, you know, legalization, or at least liberalization, because the perception is, you know, it's all, you know, chilled out surfers,
Sure.
you know, in Byron smoking weed,
Right.
not wholly, but I exaggerate to make a point. And actually, you know, it's obviously in some ways quite a conservative culture, and certainly moving very slowly in terms of anything to do with cannabis. So that is, as you say, we've discussed this before. I think if New Zealand had gone, yes, that would have made a difference because it's right on our doorstep. But that kind of notion that we're lagging behind the rest of the world, I think, never plays well in Australia, in my experience, as an expat who's been here a while.
100%.
The other thing,
but also we shouldn't forget that also, like, recreational cannabis legalization in America it wasn't manna from heaven. It didn't just magically appear on someone's doorstep. There have been well-established, well-run, long-running campaigns in multiple places for a long time that got them to where they ended up. And I just don't see that level of energy here in Australia. Like, I couldn't name more than a couple of pro-recreational legalization groups by name. We don't really have a lot of agitation for that kind of policy reform here at the moment, at least in public. I mean, I'm sure, nearly, I think over 40% of Australians now favour recreational legalisation, and a 60% or so majority favour a model that's different to, criminalising personal possession of cannabis. So, like, I think people would like that. I think people are ready for that conversation in Australia. But there's no one sort of leading that charge at the moment, as far as I can see.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually, because if thinking about the US, you have got 50 states. They're very different. Some are more liberal than others. Some think about things differently. So I guess you've got lots of potential pressure points, whereas here, you haven't got as many places for people to come to it from, if you know what I mean.
Right.
The other thing that I was, we've chatted about this before, is one of the things that Cuomo has said is, this is going to generate a whole load of revenue. It's going to generate a whole load of jobs. They've obviously been smashed by COVID, as have a lot of people. Is that the right way to think about it? Is that the right way to come at it, do you think? Or
I think it depends on what stage you're at. So first of all, there's big question marks about how much economic value you can get through jobs, new businesses, that kind of thing. I think the positive economic value from that is usually overhyped. So, usually you end up capturing less tax, and usually there are fewer jobs than you expected, just, on average, right? This is purely baseless speculation, but no one's here to fact check me, so suck it up. And the other thing is, actually, I think a lot of the economic benefits, once again, depending on your circumstance, come from the costs that you no longer have to incur. So, something like 80% of all drug arrests in Australia are for the possession of cannabis. You would not have to bother with that anymore. So you save costs on police, you save costs on prisons, you save costs on, all of the infrastructure that goes around maintaining and enforcing prohibition.
You lose a bit of revenue in terms of all the fines that get handed out for drug driving, for example. But I guess
you still have fines for drug driving, right? Like, that's still not allowed. But then in terms of at what point do you start making that argument specifically? See, I reckon, obviously New York's at the point now where they're comfortable, they're familiar enough with cannabis, they're ready to have that conversation about what's in it for me, this will be a benefit to the economy. That's great. But I think for a place like Australia, we're so far away from that. People's concerns aren't about whether my specific zone will be able to have a dispensary that I'll be able to own and operate and make money off. Their concerns are, they're still worried about, will this make my child schizophrenic if I don't criminalize Joe Blow over here for smoking weed? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point about whether it's whether that is the reality or not in terms of the economic benefits. I guess it's a way to have the conversation with politicians, though, isn't it? Because Cuomo might have got there anyway, but certainly the thought that it might somebody has obviously been in his ear and given him that line that it's going to create all of these jobs. So I guess there's there's the pure unadulterated truth, and then there's what you need to do in order to lobby for an outcome that you want, and they may not necessarily always be the same thing. And I guess that sort of neatly brings us to talking of economic benefits, etc. There was a story this week from IBISWorld, the consumer research company, and I know I smile when I say this because I remember the last time we chatted on the Cannabis podcast, you ridiculed me for daring to suggest that we might predict what might happen in 2021. As you rightly pointed out, making predictions is probably not the best thing to be doing after the year we'd had previously. But undeterred, I'm back again. They were talking about bumper year. The TGA's decision to downschedule CBD is going to have a big impact in terms of revenue and jobs. And they were actually talking about financial year, so not even calendar year. Seems a little bit early doors for me, given that it's January and we've only got 6 months to run. But what do you think? Are they right? Should we all be popping the champagne?
Could be. I mean, the industry's growing. Can't deny that. Growing pretty rapidly. Can't deny that. Revenue in 2021 could be double the revenue in 2020. That seems like a reasonable assumption to make. Problem is with these sorts of reports, they never show you they're working out, right? So they never tell you their assumptions. You can't really assess whether their logic is sound or not. Obviously, I mean, maybe the S3 CBD thing has an immediate economic impact in terms of people doing new clinical trials and developing new drugs. Obviously, no one's going to be buying over-the-counter CBD for several years minimum.
You think it's several years? You think?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, no one's even close to a position where they have a drug that could be used in a clinical trial, and even if they did, that's another year or two added onto it. So we've got some ways to run for sure, but yeah, things are on the up and up. I mean, I've spoken with several different doctors and medical cannabis clinics over the last few weeks, and people are saying, actually, we're booked out until March, we're booked out until April. Patient demand is insatiable. I think that combined with product pricing continuing to come down, we've got like well over a dozen, maybe 15 or 20 medical cannabis clinics, for want of a better word now. Yeah, it is going to be a ripper year in terms of revenue, in terms of patient access, 2021 for sure. But, always with the pinch of salt, right? Because if there's one thing that the cannabis industry globally has developed a reputation for, it's making up completely bullshit fantasy numbers about potential revenue growth that would never and could never have transpired. So I think that's still the bad taste in the back of my mouth. Like even though I'll begrudgingly admit that it's going to be a pretty good year, growth will be pretty good, I guess. In the back of my mind, I'm always like, but what about all those times where we were promised something similar and it didn't happen? But then I'm just a bit of a grumpy old man, aren't I?
well, you're grumpy. I can beat you on the old and probably the grumpiness as well. But
sure.
But yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? That you think that there has been a suggestion that the cannabis industry is on the cusp of exponential growth for some time, and from an investor point of view, you might be nervous about, well, when's that actually going to happen? But given what you just said about, the growth, people are busy, clinics are busy, and there are some admittedly baby steps, but some significant regulatory changes. You'd have to think that the momentum is only going to go one way.
Definitely.
But as you say,
I don't see it stalling anytime soon. Yeah.
No.
Although I should say we have experienced exponential growth in the medicinal cannabis industry already, but it's going from 10 patients to 100 patients in a year. That's exponential growth.
Yeah.
It's look at the overall figures. But no, it has been objectively a powerful uptick in revenue 2020. That'll definitely continue into 2021, and who knows, when it'll level out. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. On that wholly positive note, You've even got a smile on your face. I think it's probably time to call it a day. Thanks for chatting, and I'll talk to you very soon.
See you soon.
Cheers.